everyone, welcome back to another video, the penultimate video in this entire project, which is insane. Tara and I are wrapping up our bits and pieces in our respective places, and then we're going to be meeting in a couple weeks in St. Andrews to have a kind of reunion with the current RNA scholars and then past scholars as well, which should be super cool to hear what everyone's been working on this past year. Recently, I had the pleasure of interviewing Peter Money, who is a poet, an author, a musician, and the founder of Harbor Mountain Press, which has published international and local poets alike. Peter is an incredibly deep thinker. He has a poet's mind, and he just has this amazing ability to see the connections in our world and look at things in a really nuanced, microscopic way. And we ended up having a really amazing conversation. It lasted 3 hours. But I was able to kind of whittle it down to focus on his upbringing, moving from California to Vermont and then to Cape Cod, and how he started writing and looking at things through sort of poetic or writer's lens. Then we talk a little bit about how his style and voice as a poet started to emerge studying under Allen Ginsberg in New York City. And then finally, we talked about his experience working and writing in Vermont and some ideas he has for how Vermont could improve in terms of being more accessible to writers, artists, and just young people to work and live and commune together. So I had such a great time talking to him. It was really amazing. And yeah, without further ado, sit back, relax, and enjoy the video. So to start, I saw you grew up in Cape Cod and then the Northeast Kingdom. How did you find those how would you kind of characterize those two places?
I had some memory of my California experience when my family moved to Vermont, to the Northeast Kingdom. And I think I remember missing California as we were moving. Mm-hmm. I didn't know about this concept of picking up and leaving. Mm-hmm. And I remember actually feeling a little bit isolated as the third child in a family. Having to go to bed earlier, and I have this visual of being in my room in my crib in California while there was still light of day outside, and hearing the family in another room, and then to pick up and leave to Vermont, it felt a little disjointed. But Vermont was wonderful. I saw my middle brother especially kind of grow up there. You know, he did Little League Baseball, and I was the younger one who he was a Cub Scout. My mom was a den leader. Mm-hmm. and I was the one kind of peering down into the basement where the Cub Scouts met and did their projects, kind of wanting to be a part of that, mm-hmm. but not being old enough. And so I don't know, maybe I started to develop a richer imagination around that time, or maybe it started in the crib when I was alone and awake and alert. But initially I liked the snow, building, we called them forts. I don't think I'd use that term now, but we had wool mittens that got pretty cold and wet quickly. I loved, in the Northeast Kingdom, and you've probably been there, the Fairbanks Museum. A real old-timey museum. There are these two lions, lions at the entrance, and I remember a stuffed polar bear, and antiquities, mm-hmm. and taxidermy pieces, and just very, very rich for a kid who had maybe only seen those in books, and then to be in the presence of, say, a polar bear, mm-hmm. That was phenomenal. And then upstairs in that museum, there's a sort of balcony with glass cases of little collections of odd little things, and I loved that. Mm-hmm. And then we moved to Massachusetts, to Cape Cod, and And I remember asking my parents, well, what does that mean? Will it be like Vermont, and what will I find there? And I think I wanted to kind of dream it first. I wanted to have some concept of what that would look like. Maybe because we moved the first time and I had no concept. Oh yes, so in Lyndonville, Vermont, in the Northeast Kingdom, one of our neighbors had a sailfish above their fireplace, and and it was an older man. I must have been invited inside, maybe during Halloween. I remember it felt rare and special, and oh, come in. And I walked in, and there was a sailfish that just, the blue of the sail just was transfixing, and I don't know that I'd ever seen a fish with a sword, and it seemed kind of magical. And so then, come to find out, we were moving to a place surrounded by ocean water, and I went, well, will I see a sail? Will I find a sailfish there? And so I guess at this point I was maybe 8 years old, but with a younger child's imagination, maybe, or thirst. So my identification with the Cape was sailfish,
right,
and kind of magic, and salt water. In tidal places, you get this big reveal, and especially when we go to Provincetown, the tide is out for what seems to be a mile, and in fact you can beachcomb and find shards of old pipes and pottery, but I've always kind of considered the bottom of the ocean, or a tidal place especially, to reveal something like a poem.
I was just about to ask, do you see a relationship between the two?
Yeah. And so it made sense to me that I would convert my interest in archaeology to an interest in things, but through the collection of words and the resources of words. So in a sense, as much as I like to travel, I never would have to travel to explore an archaeology of my own making, or whatever it is I was observing.
I read you kept your poems in a safe.
Yeah. So I started doing that in Vermont.
Okay.
So my grandfather had a stamp collection. My dad had a stamp collection and coin collections, and I had seen some of these collections. And I guess this relates to curation. And when we moved to Cape Cod, I established a museum in my room. But just prior to that, in Vermont, as a present, I was given, maybe I asked for it specifically, because back then, we'd receive catalogs in the mail, the holiday catalog, the dream book, they called it. Anyway, I received a toy safe, and I kept my stamps and coins in there, and at one point I had written a series of poems, and I knew that they felt as special as the coins and the stamps, and I put them in a safe. And I think I knew then, okay, these are valuable, and these are important, maybe even sacred. I still have that safe. I later studied with beat poet Allen Ginsberg, and so he kind of underscored these notions that he picked up from William Carlos Williams and even Walt Whitman, and they were all very much based in objective language. Now, I say that, but I also admired abstract painting, and for me, the poem could be something much more visceral than an explanation. And some of the modernists, like Williams' idea of no ideas but in things, the thing is a representation of mood, situation, place, and how we order that, of course, can be, you know, like in a painting, hopefully it directs the reader to really aspects of feeling and attention. And I think sometimes I would leave gaps between stanzas, or I like to work in fragments. And here back to archaeology.
Yeah.
I love fragments. Language for me has been something more like food. In fact, I used to say poetry is good food. I used to end some of my correspondence. Yeah. Poetry is good food. And so I think I feel like I'm feeding myself when I create new language. And that's of course different from taking someone else's book and like they're feeding some part of me, but if I want to kind of grow and harvest and make my own food, so to speak, I need to also continue to grow, create, harvest. You know, I think a lot of the abstract painters refer to this notion of marking. Robert Motherwell was important to Ginsberg and became important to me, and I mean a lot of his work feels like markings. How does "I'm here" sell? Okay, well, hopefully it sells to the artist. Well, why is that so important? Maybe so we can be activists. You know, maybe we continue to maintain the pilot light, being comfortable in our time and contributing somehow, and we make our mark so we can confirm our existence, maybe confirm our time and place, and then maybe extend a hand. I mean, I think the ways I've been able to be a little bit activistic is, okay, maybe in embedded poetry, but also in, you know, creating a literary magazine and creating that with others, or publishing others. That feels very gratifying from a activist point of view. Choosing who you're giving a voice to, you know. And actually I think that's one thing I realized with Harbor Mountain Press. I realized, wow, I've done this for 15 years and I have very little BIPOC representation. How is that? Why, you know? And I remember I started by creating a list of poets who were friends or whom I knew who might have a manuscript ready, and I just went to them. And apparently, most of my friends looked more like me than I'd ever thought about. And I think at some point that was disturbing. And I thought, okay, well, maybe this is now for someone else to carry on. I mean, I'm proud of some of these books. We published Wendy Guerra's first book of poems in English, certainly in the United States, at a time when she was living in Cuba, not even known in her neighborhood as you know, a world-renowned writer. And Sinan Antun had poems that found us. I believe they were his first poems in English in book form ever. So little by little, I guess you do what you can where you can. In other words, I think not only our forms but our content can only expand, ought to expand.
And I feel like you see that with your work, like being based in Vermont, but then kind of reaching across.
That's always been important to me. And I don't know how much of that comes out of a personal artistic desire to, you know, expand expand what I do to others, and to provide a portal for others to get to know what I'm doing. So, do I reach out to Saudi Youssef or to Sinan Antun or to Wendy Guerra in order for my writing to reach them?
Oh, I see.
I mean, that could be like that's maybe an underlying motivation also. Maybe it's unconscious.
Do you think that creating those bridges we were talking about is important specifically because you're in Vermont and in a place people say can seem a bit isolated or a bit bubble-like?
Yeah, I do. I think increasingly I felt isolated here, which is strange because you would think after living in a place for 22 years, you would have established all the connections you need, and all, your networks would be in place, and you'd have a real routine and all that. And maybe it also has to do with the fact that I'm older than I was 22 years ago, and so maybe now that I'm older, I don't know, maybe I'm not in the same circles that were, maybe I'm not going out to open mic nights as much.
And also having kids who have graduated and aren't, in school and stuff is different.
Through the school I met James Sturm, who started the Center for Cartoon Studies.
And you worked there, right?
And I worked there, yeah. And that school is a few steps from here, and we collaborated, and that felt great. So there's a time when, maybe we were busy younger parents with, maybe we had to consolidate our time because we were, dropping our kids off at school and maybe going to teach. And so with what limited time we had left, maybe there was a lot of concision and intensity and intentionality, and it felt like we got a lot of things done. In those days I published several volumes of a literary magazine, and James and I collaborated on kind of little one-off projects, and then he wrote me into his Marvel Comics prequel to the Fantastic Four, called Unstable Molecules, and I was the poet Joey King, and who recites Jack Kerouac verbatim. That was a sort of a high intensity time, and now, it feels like maybe things have slowed down. Maybe the networks have either frayed or dispersed a bit, and maybe I'm not traveling as frequently as for some reason I was then. Vermont is very unique, as you know. Small population, a lot of land, full beautiful seasons, no billboards, a lot of creative people, a lot of people who are wearing many hats and being ingenious. And yet we're relatively far from major city centers. Yeah. And so when I was living in New York, I did feel the energy of the city, and I felt like what was going on in Brooklyn and the Lower East Side and Columbia. I took a class at Columbia with the poet Kenneth Koch, and so when just being on the train to go to Columbia to go to his class in Hamilton Hall felt like there was something vital and kind of, it felt vigorous to do that.
I mean, here, you have to drive 40 minutes,
That's true, you're right. And then we don't tend to go out or up very far during the winter. Yeah. In the spring, people are tending to their gardens, or they're, cleaning up from winter. So we kind of have this short season between May and maybe late October, when we're not really, preparing the homestead, as it were. We're maybe free to go gig, and it's not the same as being in a city and being able to walk a few blocks or take a train and meet up with another artist whose very presence is going to inspire or support or make you laugh and validate that what you're doing is fine and steady on, continue.
Yeah.
It is harder here to do that. So that's why I'm in an office now that I share with Peter Orner, whose writing I really admire and whose leavings. It's funny, I'm writing part of my memoirs about the things we leave, in large part. But Peter's leavings, like like trailings, like archaeology, are all over this space. So that already feels like support, to be welcomed into a space that is here for the purpose of serious writing. And White River Junction in particular, I often refer to it as, Little New York, or my little Lower East Side, or my little Brooklyn, or rail town. Well, because it is a railroad town, it is like a port city in that sense. We have a relative diversity of at least interests and activity, and so just coming to this building, I often interact with people I haven't seen in a while, or strangers. We have a hotel here adjacent to this building, and a theater adjacent. So, there are actors and there are people visiting this part of the world for the first time, and so it does feel like a city. Yeah, you're right. I guess I'm at the verge of that traveler's experience that I ultimately need.
Well, do you think that Vermont, or kind of the creative community, like, is lacking something or needs to change? Or do you think that the seasons that are a bit more quiet or solitary are just a part of the place and, like, necessary to it? Like, does it need to be more like New York?
I think it needs to be both of those things you said. The seasons and the solitary opportunities are necessary, because I think the drama of our seasons our seasons are dramatic enough that we have to pay attention.
Yeah.
And I think in the Bay Area, I felt like maybe I wasn't paying attention enough, because the seasons were so subtle, for the most part, that each day seemed very much like the other. And while, as artists, we can read nuance and we can amplify nuance, it just becomes harder, maybe more draining, to eke out the nuance all the time. And that might be an oversimplification of the Bay Area. I do really like the Bay Area, and I like California. But I think Vermont also needs to improve its infrastructure, its arts infrastructure, its funding, its grants process, its outreach to audiences, its spaces, live-work spaces for artists. We have a housing crisis. A lot of places do, but Vermont needs to grow. We need our population to be a little younger than the median right now. We want an inflow of intellectual and artistic and entrepreneurial spirit, but we're not really set up for that. I have a couple ideas. So at one point, my friend James Sturm, the cartoonist, had nominated me for a Vermont State Poet Laureate, and so at the time I drew up a sort of manifesto, and I had this notion that we need more hubs with more spokes, all over, like every county could have arts centers that are connected to neighboring counties, that are connected to, more urban centers like Rutland, Montpelier, Brattleboro, Burlington, and that we have sort of representatives that kind of meet, kind of the way union representatives might meet, and we begin to collaborate more town to town. I mean, if one town has a variety show or puts on a play, why not tour that show to the 5 neighboring towns?
Yeah.
You know, often we'll read about something that happened 1 or 2 towns over, and it's a shame that, you know, this amazing thing happened for maybe 400 people, and maybe or a fraction of that. We have a classical musical series now in our town in West Windsor, and it went 4 days last summer, and I think we had about 200 people attend over those 4 days. But gosh, what if that could tour, or what if more people knew about that? But also, if we had a light rail, you know, in Europe, you see it all over Europe, right? I mean, you can be in a place like Scotland or Ireland, and the agricultural land is undisturbed. You're a little cow track, you know, and you're in a little metal and glass sphere just ambling through countryside.
Yeah.
And our farmland really could use more support. You know, maybe they would give way to a little tract for a light rail, and maybe that would even actually help educate and promote visitors and residents to the amount of agricultural land we have, and you know, put a light rail through the countryside, and you get the artists from White River Junction to Montpelier to Burlington. You'd be at no loss to Vermont integrity.
Yeah, in fact, it's probably more environmentally friendly if it means people aren't driving as much. You can't take in the landscape the same way when you're like trying to watch the road.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, you've probably experienced this. You know, someone in the car will say, "Oh, you know, look at the deer," and I can't really look right now.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, look at the snow cover. Oh, look at the full foliage.
That's a really good idea.
And it's conducive to more creation too. I mean, I think a lot of artists are inspired on trains specifically, but the connectivity, I think, is I think that's the more vital aspect. It's just, I think it's easy to live in a bit of a bubble. Having the opportunity to travel and to do it on public transportation is going to bring us closer to others, and maybe it creates a sort of overall calmer, more cohesive public, a sort of, you know, atmosphere of cooperation. I mean, maybe that's the metaphor for arts, right? It's like, okay, we're bridge builders. Some people don't cross that bridge. Not all people. Not everyone has to.
Yeah.
But we're providing a bridge, and I used to, when I was teaching, I used to like to draw, you know, a small circle on the board, and then another circle around that, and then another circle, and I also have this Jasper Johns Target T-shirt.
Oh yeah, I love Jasper.
Yeah. And so this idea of expansion, I mean, it's of course very, it very much alludes to our origins too. This notion that every step of the way we're kind of doing what, you know, Plato describes in the allegory of the cave. We're emerging, and we're expanding, and we're branching out, and we're identifying things beyond us, and that expanding circle, be it consciousness or community, it's bound to happen, right? If you're born in an egg and you wander out and you flit and you fly, you're going to find community. You get transported to Vermont and then to Cape Cod and you dream of sailfish. You're going to find yourself in a community, and then I guess we're then helping ourselves and each other continue to expand in a non harmful way, right? Of course, there's corporate expansion, and there's
imperialism.
Yeah, and imperialism and that kind of expansion that we can certainly make a case does harm, but if it's harmless expansion, that seems to me to be another way of describing the sort of bridge that you're describing between impulses to find community and make meaning.
All right, everyone. Well, that is it for today's video. Thank you so much for watching, and a big thank you to Peter for letting me interview him. I really admire him as a writer and a thinker, and it was just such a pleasure to have the chance to talk about these things. I'll leave some links down below to his bio, as well as where you can find his books of poetry and his novel called Oh When the Saints. You guys take care, have a good week, and I will see you very shortly for the final video, which is, yeah, absolutely mad. All right, take care. Bye.